Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood Podcast. I'm Joe. With me is Greg, as always, here to recap Feast Week and preview the next week's games. Greg, how are you doing?
I am so glad to think and talk about something other than my fantasy football team right now. This is going to be an escape for the next 45 minutes to an hour, so I don't have to think about that.
So, for anyone listening, Greg is about to possibly be in one of the greatest final weeks of regular season fantasy football of all time. There might be four teams vying for two spots, and might come down to point differential, which Greg would have the upper hand on. So, or point scored, sorry, point scored, not point differential. But going to be fun. I know he took a tough loss today, but like you said, it's good we have college
Hey,
basketball.
I'm not out of it yet.
Not out of it yet. Not out of it yet.
I just need George Kittle to have a huge game in the snow in Buffalo.
Could happen. Crazier things have happened. Greg, one of the crazy things that happened this week is UConn in the Maui just fell apart. No defense. Dan Hurley's throwing tantrums on the sideline. We're going to get into the Maui here in a little bit, but just that's something that needs to be mentioned about Feast Week. That's kind of like the biggest thing that you have listed on our outline that I was going to say is like the three-peat looks like it's on life support, and defense is mainly the reason why. I think that's I don't know. Well, let's table that for now. We'll talk. You can talk about it when we get to the Maui, and then we also this week we have the Big 12, Big East, and the ACC SEC challenges the same week. I wish they were kind of divided up to kind of give more variance to the schedule, but there is a lot of good games to watch this week. Greg put the games we're going to talk about later on our sheet, and honestly, he could have put probably like 10 more because there's just that many good ones to talk about. But let's start off with the Maui, Greg. Like I said, the biggest takeaway for me is UConn. What we're going to do with the recap of some of the tournaments, I think, is just give our biggest takeaways. We can't go recap every single game that happened in every tournament. That would take forever. So UConn is the main thing, but Greg, you want to talk about that for a bit? That's fine. But what other takeaways do you take away from the Maui Invitational this year?
Uh, let's see. I'm still trying to pull up the bracket. I just like to have that visual in my in front of my face to help me
Of course, of course.
to help me look at it. But I mean, like you said, UConn, Auburn. We want to sit here and talk about UConn, but you got to talk about Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pick a lot right last week in terms of these tournaments. But it's funny. It's funny, Joe. When we were picking the Maui, I said, "Oh man, I run the risk of my title contender being out day one or not eligible to win the title on day one." And here we are, Monday at 5:30. UConn's out, who I believe you picked, but it just turned out
Mm-hmm.
completely the opposite of how we thought it would go. Auburn still had a decently difficult path to the title, beating they first game beat Iowa State and then Carolina, and then they beat Memphis in the title game pretty handedly. But they got to be. I mean, like there's a lot up in the air right now. And me and Joe and I are texting each other throughout the week, and then we're like, nobody's good. I guess outside of like, there's a couple of sure things right now, and even they're maybe they have their flaws. I wouldn't say they're shaky, but they have their flaws. But you got your Auburn, you got your Kansas, and like even they are like they've got some things to work on. But you know we don't have to get into it now. But Gonzaga, we'll talk about them in a little bit when we get to their tournament. But there's just very few sure things out there right now this year. And Joe, I don't know if it's like a bigger, we've talked about transfer portal, we've talked about NIL. I mean, like this. Do you wonder if maybe like another variable? I was just thinking while I was watching. 2020, everything shuts down. Like, are we maybe seeing like just a step back in basketball, or do you think it's just all of the other variables? Like some of these kids obviously didn't play a ton of games for a year, and this is probably that group that we're seeing right now on the floor.
Yeah, I think this is more of a the game has changed type of thing. Recruiting rankings matter less, and that is because the game has become more about skill than athleticism. We've talked about some freshmen the last couple of years that have struggled, even though they've been tremendous athletes, and it's just not what the game is about anymore. That you can credit that to Steph Curry and the 3-point shot, kind of opening things up. So that's part of it. The transfer portal as well. If you get a top recruiting class, that doesn't mean the same thing as it used to mean. I think we're finding that even though the freshman class this year is playing well, we see some of those teams struggling early on. Maybe they'll develop and change things up. But I think both those things play a key factor where, is it better to get the 20th ranked recruit in the class, Greg, who may not be a one and done. Maybe sometimes they do turn in one and dones, but like may not be a one and done. Just a solid freshman, maybe averages 5-6 points a game, or is it better to go get a guy who played in the MEAC who averaged 20 points a game? Like that's something you got to consider. Like it's different levels of competition. I think that's all kind of adding up here, and the styles of play of shooting a lot of threes is the greatest equalizer in any sport there is. So that's what I think's going on. To kind of talk about the Maui myself, UConn definitely concerns me. I don't want to count out Dan Hurley. It is a 3-day tournament, so I'm not going to say it's the three-peat's over. But there are things that happen in the tournament that make you kind of concerned, right? Like the interior defense isn't the same with Donovan Clingan not there anymore. It seems like he was more frustrated than he has been, and I think it's because of his own team. He obviously lashed out at the officials a bunch, but I think more about his team and how they played. There are some bright spots on this team. I'm not sure if the guard play is going to be enough to get him over the top either, so it's just not the same UConn team. And I dislike that he said, like, we're not going to do any more 3-day tournaments for these MTEs or these early season tournaments. I think it's like John Calipari did that too, and I get, like, it's supposed to be not the end of the world if you don't win these tournaments, right? Like, we've seen teams lose these tournaments, go win the national championship. We've seen teams do well in this and then end up going back to the mainland and not doing well. So I don't like that either. I think that's kind of like a loser mentality in that aspect, which is weird to say about a national championship winning coach, but I think that's kind of weird that you would say, hey, we're not going to do the Maui anymore. It's the premier event. So Greg, what do you got on that?
Well, yeah, the only thing I want to add to that is, I don't know if you remember, maybe a week or two ago, they played formerly Texas A&M what is it? Texas A&M Commerce. Now they changed their name to East Texas A&M. And after that game, they won by like 30. And after that game, he said, what did he say? Comically bad about their, and it was like, at the time, it was kind of like, I mean, like, but maybe there's something he sees that that we don't. I mean, we're not in practice every day. The only other thing I would add, looking long term for UConn, there was the game where Reed and Jalen Stewart, was that the first game? Was that the Memphis game where they each came off the bench? I think had,
I believe,
like,
yeah,
10 to 15 each. I mean, like that I mean, gives you if you want to look at a bright spot, like, if we're looking back, 2-3 weeks from now, and we're like, oh my goodness, all of a sudden they're 8 deep, like that. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm just saying, if you want to give them any reason to hope for, this team to turn into something, when you start looking at all of the stats that have been brought up this week, they lost 3 non-conference games in 3 days, and that's more than they've lost since like 2021 or whatever, like total. It does start to get a little jarring, but he's got the coaching in him. It is very difficult to sustain a team where it's like, win the title 2 years ago, almost complete roster turnover, win the title again, almost complete roster turnover outside of like Caravan and Samson Johnson. Like, that's difficult to do. And the three-peat, is probably like, we probably need to like say that's not expectation for this year. I would say, hey, if you make the tournament and you make the second weekend, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but like, I would still chalk it up as a victory, especially with where this team is at right now today.
I'm with you, and I think some misses in the transfer portal. It gets early. They can develop Aiden Mahaney, maybe not the impact player. And Dan Hurley even said that preseason, like, he's just not where he needs to be. He wants to develop him. We'll see how that goes. But it does, like, this is important in a different sense of, like, before conference play starts, they have 3 more games. They have Texas, they have Gonzaga, they Baylor, Texas, and Gonzaga back to back to back, and then conference play starts with Xavier on the 18th. So it is not the easiest ride here, and they need to get things corrected. So we'll keep tabs on UConn. I think you're right. The expectations need to be lowered. If they make the second weekend, that's great. If they don't make the second weekend, obviously Dan Hurley's not going anywhere. But it's like, hey, who do we have to identify in the portal to get into this program? Who do we have to recruit to get into this program to help this team get to the next level again?
Yeah, Joe, I just want to bring up that, I know you said it, the Baylor UConn game. I have that like on the outline. I don't think that with so many games on Wednesday, I have a bunch of questions. I don't know if I just say we don't need to necessarily devote time and pick that. But I will say right now, looking at that game, it's like one of those teams I think is going to walk out of that game being on red alert, because Baylor's had their struggles, and obviously we know UConn's had their struggles. I would not want to walk out of that game the loser, because it could really put a downer on the season for whatever team.
Definitely could, and we're not going to. Hopefully, some of those teams can play. Either of those teams can play defense. To be honest, with some of their issues, yeah, we're going to talk about that later. Greg, other teams from the Maui, I think like Auburn and Iowa State, maybe as expected in different regards in this tournament. We have North Carolina kind of struggling at the end there after winning their first game against Dayton, but even struggling against Dayton. I think the two biggest things from this tournament, though, were honestly the mid majors. Whereas it was Dayton, if you want to call them mid majors, Dayton and Memphis, both kind of shocked. And I think we'll start with Memphis here, Greg. Tyrese Hunter transferring in with PJ Haggerty, great, I guess tandem there, and they are probably like living up to the talent. And the thing that I think we thought before the season is like, hey, is the coaching staff turnover? They had to like get a whole new coaching staff September. That's a quick turnaround to get things going. So props to Penny for not having like the biggest names, like he's had like big recruits before. But like, and Tyrese Hunter is a good player, don't get me wrong, but like not the biggest like recruits, but he has this team playing well. And then also for Dayton, I know you're going to talk about them here in a second, but I mean, I think you couldn't come away more impressed with how Dayton played in this tournament. Sure, they could have knocked off North Carolina. Sure, they could have knocked off Iowa State, but they were competitive in every game, and then they destroyed UConn in the end. Obviously, that win isn't as good as like actually beating the number 2 team. They were number 2, but not as good as beating a number 2 team who maybe stays there. But these are two teams that I know you mentioned Dayton in the preseason. I mentioned Memphis in the preseason as like teams to watch out for. Maybe they can go on the run in the tournament. And for Memphis, I think for both of us, it was coaching staff and how are they going to get the most out of this talent. And for Dayton, it was, hey, the offense maybe not great. How do you replace Holmes in the middle? How is this offense going to look? And there's still some concerns there. But how do you feel about Memphis and Dayton, Greg?
Yeah, Dayton. I was talking to my brother-in-law, Cameron. We stayed up till midnight and we watched the UD UConn game, and were rewarded for staying up late. But we were saying, last season we went to it was an exhibition game, and Enoch Cheeks had himself an absolute tear of a game. He was hitting from deep, he was getting shots at the rim, he was hitting mid range. He was a very versatile player, and then like, I don't know if the way Brea shot the ball, and obviously Duran had tons of paint touches, I don't know if that just like he's really developed and being, I don't want to say the centerpiece, but like he has grown leaps and bounds. And I don't know if I mean like he's gotten better, or if it's just like his role is different and he's really filled it out. Like I feel like I saw glimpses of this last year, but like there was just so much else on the team. I still think they missed some of that inside presence. Emil Latong, big skinny guy, really good passing out of the post, knows when he's double teamed, but they don't I mean, like, they just don't have that dominant post scorer. They still have Nate Santos, they still have Enoch Cheeks, Javon Ben, all these guys can shoot, but obviously that may leave them a little bit vulnerable if they want to get in, a shooting match with the team, and they're just not hitting. Hopefully they can get to the rim a little bit more with the guards, because I just don't think that the big guys are going to be that for them. On the Memphis side, yeah, I mean, you said it. They got dudes. They're athletic and they can actually play the game. I mean, like, they're good.
Yeah.
They should be the front runner in the American. No questions about it.
Yeah, interested to watch both these teams throughout the seasons. Yes, they'll take losses in conference, like maybe they shouldn't, that we always see with these teams. It's hard to, win every game you're supposed to win in college basketball, especially. But excited to watch what they can do if they did this well in the Maui, which is, again, neutral site. Both, sides of the coin there have to deal with the travel, have to deal with time change, everything else, the small gym, everything. It is encouraging to see them play that well. So that wraps up the Maui, Greg. Let's move on to Tuesday and the Players Era Festival. This obviously went on for a lot of last week, but there were a lot of good teams in this, and I have a couple takes here, but I'm going to let you go first. What are some of your top takeaways from this event?
Houston struggling surprised me. Again, I'm trying to pull up a bracket just so I have a visual, but that one kind of got me. So they lost last night to San Diego State. and they struggled mightily with Notre Dame. Notre Dame hung in there. I mean, it was a classic Houston, like, high 50s, low 60s game. Um, what else was there? Creighton struggled. They got walloped by San Diego State in the first game. I didn't realize until late yesterday Kalkbrenner didn't play in the final game yesterday against Texas A&M. So take that result with a little bit of a grain of salt. Bama, they did. I mean, they did about what I would expect. I mean, it's a little bit interesting that they went to overtime with Houston, and it was a high scoring game. I mean, like Houston put up some points in that game, but obviously just wasn't enough. I mean, I'll let you talk about Oregon. I feel like I've taken a lot of airtime.
No.
But you go ahead and tell the people about Oregon basketball, Big Ten Oregon basketball, not Pac-12 Oregon basketball.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think honestly, you still have to be concerned about the Big Ten thing too. Like the travel hasn't been too intense for them. Mostly played their games at home. This event, obviously in the west part of the United States, played a road game at Oregon State already, but they're undefeated this year. Well, I'll start with Oregon. I was definitely going to bring up that they're undefeated on the year, 8-0. Dana Altman, I think, is still one of the most, underrated coaches in college basketball. There's definitely the thing with him is like it's not consistent. There will be some good years or like years we make the Final Four, and then the next year it kind of comes down to earth a little bit. Sometimes they'll make the tournament, sometimes they won't, and that makes it tough. And the thing I like about this team is they don't have guys who routinely score a ton of points. They have a lot of guys. I think their leading scorer has 14.6 points per game. It's a very balanced approach, and I don't think they maybe have the most talent, and they're outperforming their talent level. And I think that's all coaching. I think that is something that definitely needs to be taken into account early in the season. So I'm excited to see what Oregon can do in the Big Ten, especially once they start traveling to the East Coast for some of these games. Greg, you mentioned for Creighton, their struggles. Kalkbrenner didn't play against Notre Dame in the final game. He did play against Texas A&M and San Diego State. Stephen Ashworth didn't play in the first game of this tournament. And I think if you lose either one of those guys, this team is not very good. And that's not really, I guess, a good deal to be in that situation. But we saw Stephen Ashworth be able to run the team when he came back. We saw him be able to hit outside shots. That opened things up for Kalkbrenner inside. He's so good, but when teams are fronting the post and having help come from behind, it is working on him. And that is something teams will start to replicate in the future. But if they have guys like Ashworth stretching the floor, that really helps things. He helps calm it down because it seemed like there was, Kalkbrenner and a lot of chuckers on this team beforehand. But it's very important Creighton gets this down soon. As you mentioned, Greg, to me in a text, Big East, very bad this year. I don't know how it's going to shake out when we're all done, but it looks like SEC and Big Ten are having the best conference year so far, despite some, Big Ten maybe not having an elite team. Creighton has 3 losses already. They don't have a marquee win. Notre Dame is not a marquee win after what they've shown this year yet. They have Kansas, UNLV, and Alabama before Big East play. If they don't win at least the UNLV game, but maybe 2 games out of that, it could get really dicey to get some impressive wins in the Big East this year. So watch out for them. I do like them when they're healthy. I do think they'll figure this out with McDermott kind of running things, but I think I'm watching out for them too. You mentioned Houston struggling. Again, I'll trust the coaching to get that under wraps and get things improved. Alabama did lose to Oregon. We know Oregon's better than we thought now. I do think Alabama still has a little bit of that. Can lose on any night because they're so reliant on the three-point shot. And I think that kind of comes through sometimes. So a lot to take away from the Players Era Festival. I like the event because there was good teams in it. I didn't really like the format of it, to be honest. But there was just so many good teams playing. Texas A&M, still don't know what to make out of them either. I don't know if you have anything on them either, but I can't make anything out of them.
Didn't we do this last year with them?
Yes.
It feels like the story's on repeat.
We did, and the thing, Wade Taylor was I think he kind of got into a little bit more of a groove here, but he's not having his best year. He's shooting 39% from the floor, 15.9 points per game. Obviously, he was closer to 20 last year. I think before this event, he was down at 14 points a game. So that he needs to get going. So I think honestly, this Feast Week was really, really good for some of the Maui was incredible with the games they had. But we're finding out a lot of holes in these teams, like you mentioned earlier, Greg. There's a lot of, I think, parity in the sport this year that I think maybe we haven't had in a while. So, any final thoughts on the Players Era Festival before we move on?
I think we covered it.
All right, let's go to Duke and Kansas. Greg, I'm going to give you a shout out here. Fixed my picks on the website on our sheet because I picked Kansas on this show. Accidentally put Duke in the picks for the website, so apologize for anyone who read that early. I did fix it as soon as possible. It was a long week last week, so that definitely played into it. So Kansas beats Duke 75-72. This is a game where I think Kansas experience kind of comes through again. Maybe not the most talented team. We have some interesting notes in this one. Hunter Dickinson gets into some trouble in this game. And I think Duke's youth at the end of games is kind of tricky here for the time being. Greg, I'll kind of let you go first on where you want to start with that. That's just kind of setting the table for you.
Yeah, I think we're just realizing that Bill Self really did fix that depth issue that Kansas had last year. I mean, like Storr and Zeke Mayo and like I don't want to just name dudes' names, but like Hunter did for heaven's sake, Hunter Dickinson got kicked out of this game and they still won. Can you just imagine yourself that happens last year? They're done. They're absolutely done. There's no way. I like this team has it's well rounded. They have DeJuan Harris running the point, makes good decisions. They take care of the ball. It's kind of just what we said last week when we previewed this game. The experience won out. Now, these two teams, if they play each other in March, it might be a different story. You know, I don't know. They're just young, and I think this is a good experience for this Duke team, especially in a neutral site. You know, where a tournament game would be. I mean, there's bright sides to this. I mean, their defense still is great. I mean, they took it on the chin early in this game. It was what, like 13-3 or 16-3 or something. I can't remember what the exact score, but I mean, they took it on the chin early, and they did not give up. And you know, it turned out to be one of those 50-50 games. Came down, you know, the last couple possessions, but you know, props to them for hanging in there. Same things we've kind of already said. They could really use some better guard play, some more dynamic guard play. Caleb Foster, a couple times. That was something I noticed early. Man, they are not getting the ball inside. You know, they're not getting it, and they do like to play a kind of 4-out, 5-out system. And Malawach isn't really going to, not a ton of times, catch the ball back to the basket. The ways they like to create for their shooters. And I noticed later in the game, Caleb Foster starts getting to the hole, creates, you know, some help situations. You get those same shots, but you get them differently. And he did make a few inside layups. So just one thing to watch out for. I'd like to see them try and force the issue inside before just settling for a jump shot as they, you know, did a lot in the first half.
Definitely agree with that one. I am still very concerned about Duke because of their guard play, and I think, to be quite frank here, Greg, you never want to say this, but they're losing games because of Con Knippel. Like, he's shooting poorly from the field. If he makes 40% of his shots, they win. If he makes 1-3 in this game, they obviously are tied. It's hard to like pin things on one player, but that's how this Duke roster is constructed, right? Like, you know, like you said, Malawach is not going to do anything on the interior very much. He's going to, you know, maybe protect the paint, maybe get some dunks in the game. Not much of a post presence. We have Cooper Flagg, who had 13 points in this game, but, you know, played decently. You know, Tyrese Proctor stepped up, but it seems like this Duke team can only have two players step up at a time, whether that's Flagg and Knippel, whether it's Flagg and Proctor. That's what I'm watching for this next couple little stretch of games is like, hey, can we get those three guys? Because it looks like it's going to be Proctor, Knippel, and Flagg as the main guys this year. And I still have my concerns with that because I don't know how good Proctor is. I don't know how good Foster is going to be to help him. But that's what I've noticed too is like, I don't think Duke should panic, A, because they're young, and B, because Knippel's proven to be a good shooter in the past, and these shots will start going down. But can they get three guys to give them points in a given game? Like, it's so hard to kind of boil it down to that, but that's just what I've noticed is like, these big games, he hits one of these threes, it just changes everything. So that's for them. For Kansas, you're right about the depth. Badunga, I think, sometimes comes into the game and actually gives them more of a lift than Hunter Dickinson. Different type of player, different skill set too. So probably better defense. Definitely better defense, honestly. But that changes things for them too. I think while they are the number one team in the country, they are not unbeatable. They have a very well constructed team, and I think that is already number one. But I do think them beating Duke by just 3 when that was the circumstances of like Konkanipple shooting 0 of 8 from 3 again, it shows how vulnerable everyone this season is, and that's all thanks to the transfer portal, all thanks to NIL kind of making rosters move around and have different players on it. So good game. Thanks for playing this game, Duke and Kansas. We like to see more of these. Obviously, we like to see more of them on campus, but we want to see more of these big games and more of the Blue Bloods play each other, and this was a good way to do that.
More Terry's chocolate.
More Terry's chocolate, yeah. Another name for an event that we were going to forget about in 1 week. All right, so next up, Greg, we have the Battle for Atlantis, an event that had some pretty good teams as well. Some surprising results in this one, including Gonzaga losing their first game to West Virginia and Tucker DeVries in their first season there at West Virginia for the DeVries family. So what do you think, Greg? What's on your mind for this Battle for Atlantis?
Yeah, Louisville, Oklahoma with the Battle for Atlantis title game, just like we both picked that exact title game. That's exactly what we thought was going to happen, and there's not much to talk about, right? Because Gonzaga lost on the first day to a team that I think gave basically a footnote last week. Hey, Tucker DeVries is fun to watch. Okay,
Yep.
All right. Well, they mess around and beat Gonzaga. Indiana looks putrid, and like it was one of those things where this tournament started on Wednesday. On Wednesday, right? Started on Wednesday.
Yes.
So on Wednesday, when it's Louisville and Indiana playing, you start thinking in your head, and I mean that game was never ever close, never close. But you start thinking in your head, you're like, well, is Louisville is Indiana just bad or is Louisville good? Like we're not really sure. And then they go and they lose to Gonzaga, and they beat Providence, but it's like, man, that they're for how much it's kind of like the Ohio State thing, man, where like they put in terms of football, like they put a lot of money, a lot of NIL money into their roster, and it's just not there. And I mean, like I feel like it's the same conversation where we've been having. Like it's not the dudes, it's probably the coaching. So look out for Woodson to be on his way out, because in 49 other states it's just basketball, but this is Indiana, so I can't imagine unless they turn it around that he's going to he's going to be there much longer. But Oklahoma and Louisville, I mean, like we were talking about Porter Moser as maybe being like a seats kind of warm, and let's see him do it back in the mainland. Joe, with traveling, I don't know how much of this tournament you're able to watch. Obviously, there's not enough time in the day to literally watch every single one of these games that happen. But I know Kobe Elvis transferred from Dayton to he transferred from Dayton to Oklahoma. And one of these games he had 26, and I think the other he had like 2. So I wonder if they met how much they miss Otega Oweh, like where this team would be. Just watching what he's doing at Kentucky, like they win Battle for Atlantis without him. I don't know. Other thoughts? Arizona, I mean, like, not trouble, but like still, like, hey, like probably about where we thought they were. Like, maybe probably like looking at. I don't know, Joe. What do you think? You think they're maybe looking at? They're probably looking a little better than going to Dayton, but they're probably looking like 8-9 seed territory with the way they're playing right now, right?
For Arizona?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, they've 3-4 on the season, haven't really beat anyone. I mean, if not that you want to do it this way, but if you start the tournament right now, they're probably out. So, I was So
talk about projecting.
Yeah, maybe first 4 in Dayton, but they're a bubble team through and through, and it doesn't look like it's going to be easy in that Big 12 either. So. Even though the Big 12 is having their own struggles non-conference as well. But yeah, I think this is like kind of like we talked about preseason of like Arizona. Their roster is just not constructed in a good way. So like Mentioned last year I like Caleb Love because of what he had around him. This year I just don't like him. Like I think he's a good player and I think he has talent, but if you put sometimes guys are inefficient because of the systems they're in, because of the players around, because of the coaching. This team is much different than last year's team, and I feel like he's going to be very inefficient because he feels like he has to do everything. That's going to lead to inefficiency all over. They just don't have a lot of talent around them. A lot of guys who coming off the bench last year are now starting, and it's an ugly mess. I would not be surprised if Arizona misses the tournament. It have one of their worst seasons in recent memory. I think that's very much on the table. So that's my takeaway for Arizona. You already mentioned Indiana, so I won't go too much into them just so we're not repeating ourselves the whole time. But I will say Oklahoma, very impressive for them. They basically lost everyone. Porter Moser did a great job constructing the roster back together. As you mentioned, Otega Owe at Kentucky, but there's other guys who've left the program too. So he did a really good job and now puts them in a place to, if they keep this momentum going, pretty good for the SEC. The SEC's had a very good non-conference schedule results, and they also he puts himself in a good spot to be coach of the year because of how low the expectations were with how much he had to replace. And then one last thought from me, Greg, or two last thoughts. One, I'm not concerned about Gonzaga at all. They'll figure it out. I think Cleef Battle is an absolute steal. It'll be there. And then the second one, I'm still concerned about Louisville. The win over Indiana, maybe that says more about Indiana being bad than it says Louisville being good, I guess is the way I'll put it. They did beat West Virginia as well. The offense gets very stagnant at times where they can't score at all, and that really scares me. I think they need other people to step up besides Chucky Hepburn. Chucky Hepburn's their leading scorer. He's been very good on defense. He's a good distributor. But if he's your leading scorer at 14.6 points per game, I think your team has problems, and I think that's something they need to figure out. Their second leading scorer, Ryan Smith, came with Pat Kelsey from Charleston. Kashawn Pryor from USF, 12 points a game. But I really thought Terrence Edwards, the Furman transfer, would be the leading scorer, be the go-to guy. So right now, I'm not too high in Louisville. I'll give them credit. They played well in this tournament. But I do think if they're going to reach their full potential of possibly being, maybe a tournament team, maybe going to the second weekend, if things shake their way, Terrence Edwards has to step up. He can't be scoring 11 points a game and have three different guys who some of them aren't the best scorers ahead of him on the points per game list. That's just something to watch out for the future. But I am impressed with what Pat Kelsey has done in such a short period of time too. Like this is his first year at a big program. Only losses are to Oklahoma in a championship game event and Tennessee, who Tennessee looks better than projected too. So, all right, any final thoughts about for Atlantis, Greg? All right,
covered it.
Let's go to the Thursday, the Thanksgiving Classic or whatever they called this game, the Illinois-Arkansas game. We had the Visich brothers going up against each other, which was kind of fun. But Illinois wins this one. They score 90 points. I don't know what else to say here besides, again, thank you, Greg, for updating our sheet because I missed this one as well, what team I had picked. But also, I think Kasparis, my guy that we talked about preseason, living up to the hype, going to be a lottery pick most likely, had a big game. And then this just feels so familiar to me as a Kentucky fan with how things start and how John Calipari's not able to change his philosophy. And even last year, Greg, at Kentucky, they did shoot a lot of threes. They had the personnel to do that, whether it was Reed Sheppard or Dillingham or other players shooting threes. They did a lot of that. And even now, they're not shooting their three ball very well. They shot 29.4% from three in this one. Other than Big Z, who had 3 for 6, and John L. Davis, who went 1 for 2, it was very, very poor shooting night for most others. So I would say I'm officially concerned for John Calipari at Arkansas overall. I'm very concerned for this year. And for Illinois, I think they're good. I think they'll be a tournament team. I think they can maybe push towards the top 5 in the Big Ten, which I know I've been dicey about just because I don't know who's going to finish where. But, man, I think the biggest takeaway for me is still the Arkansas side of things.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have a ton coming up. This week they do have SEC ACC challenge. They're playing Miami, but I don't think we're going to learn a ton from that. The only other big out of conference game they have is Michigan. So I don't know how much we're going to really learn about Arkansas before they go into conference play, and their first conference game is Tennessee. So that should be real fun for them. Illinois, I mean, we don't want to repeat anything we've already said, but it's kind of one of those things where I think Joe's kind of captured it. Like, we're just not really sure what to do with them, and I don't know that this win is like okay, that's fine and all. I'm glad you kind of took care of business, and it looks like they have some pieces, but not really ready to say anything about. I definitely think you walk like forget the score. Like you walk away from this game thinking like I'd rather be an Illinois fan than an Arkansas fan right now. Like absolutely no question about it. Projecting better, looking like the pieces that they put together. I mean, Kylan Boswell is looking like. I mean, I felt like I watched him early last year when he was at Arizona, and I was like, I think it was the Arizona Duke game last year, and I was like, man, he had a really good game, and then he kind of fell off after that, and like, wasn't that big of a contributor. Well, he's a big contributor this year at Illinois. They didn't even get much from Will Riley off the bench. Like there's depth, and I don't know if like the same depth, but like there's I won't say depth. I'll say there's options. There's options on this team. They can go different ways on different games. They could turn into something. Hate to say it for the zillionth time in an open Big Ten. Like,
yeah,
could be good enough to be top 3 in the Big Ten. Don't know. Arkansas, it's probably time to hit the panic button.
Definitely hitting the panic button. And again, for me, that's even long term, not just this season, because things need to change. Note here, you're right. Will Riley had 5 points in this game. He was their leading scorer. And it just, I think Kylan Boswell fits better as a guy that isn't running the show. He's your secondary playmaker, a guy who can handle the ball, a guy who can shoot a little bit at times, but not your top scorer, not your top playmaker, a guy who can kind of like blend in and be a very good role player on a team. And that's something that he enjoyed last year at Arizona. Down the stretch, things didn't go their way, but this is a good fit for him because of the makeup of this team. So I'm more excited for this team than I thought I was going to be. I thought they were maybe slightly overrated with how people were talking about them preseason. Now I think they're probably underrated. They're probably going to be ranked maybe this week. I don't know. But they have talent enough where I think they could, depending on how much Kasparis develops and Vesic, to be honest, the sky could be the limit for this team. They could win the Big Ten, and that is crazy to think about. And it's not going to say they're infallible. They just like everyone else in college basketball, they haven't played the best all the time. They did lose to Alabama in a game that they lost by 13 points. So we'll see what happens here. But I had to point that out, that I think it's just, again, team that has a good makeup here. All right, Greg, let's move on to our picks from this week. Now, as mentioned, this will be one of the best weeks of college basketball in the regular season that we'll see. Obviously, we just came off Feast Week, which is really good. But with the 2 different challenges on the same week, that is going to create some really good games. So let's start it off on Wednesday. There are some decent games on Tuesday, at least of decent programs. The Big Ten schedule starts: Michigan, Wisconsin, Wake Forest, Texas A&M. But in Ole Miss and Louisville, Kentucky, Clemson. But as you said, there's too many to get to talk about every single one. You can see ranked picks on thegamehouse.com. You can ask our questions on Twitter if you see our handles underneath us. But let's start. We'll do the UConn Baylor game. I think I'm going Baylor just because we don't know what to expect from UConn, and at least we know Baylor. I mean, I don't know. We don't know much about them either, but I guess we know Baylor. I trust in their guard play a little bit more, so I'm going to go Baylor in this one, Greg.
UConn's lost 3 games in a row. I'm going to pick UConn. Like just on that alone, the Baylor defense hasn't been good. We know that the defense on UConn hasn't been good either. But a stoppable force goes up against a movable object, so one of them's going to win, right?
Yep.
I'm gonna trademark that phrase. So get the Game House lawyers on that.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, it's. I'll take UConn. Just I can't, like the thought of them losing 4 games in a row. Well, no, I guess they had. So it wouldn't be 4 in a row, but 4 in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I can't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, they did. You're right. They beat Maryland Eastern Shore after they came back. I'm kind of with you. I can't wait for those stats to come out. UConn undefeated on U.S. mainland, since this date, and it's going to, kind of pass over the fact they lost in Maui. We'll keep it moving, Greg. Let's move on to Auburn at Duke. This is one I think they kind of notified that these two teams might be on the top of the SEC and the ACC with the incoming freshmen at Duke and just some of the players Auburn had returning, including Janai Broom. I am very excited for this matchup specifically, Greg. Who are you going with in this one?
I mean, like if this was at Auburn, I wouldn't even blink. Like, regardless of how much talent Duke has, but in Cameron, Auburn, yes, is on a tear, but like it's a difficult place to go into. Coming off the Kansas game, they got a little experience. I'll just take Duke on, just on the futures on the them starting to take some of that talent. Knipple can't continue to have as bad a shooting as watch him go 6 of 8 from deep in this game. Like that would be enough to really turn the tide of the game with how good this Duke. I mean, that's the thing. This Duke defense looks like a 2010s 2005 Duke team. They're playing really good. I mean, we know they're their players are very long. They're lanky. They move well, but they are just flat out playing good defense. So if they can get someone to pop, and that could be Knipple or maybe Flag has a good shooting night. I'm not going to be obviously surprised if Auburn goes into Cameron and wins this game, but just for the sake of this game, I'll take Duke.
All right, you're probably making the smart call there, going with the home team. I'm going to go with Auburn though, based on what we've seen so far, right? So I think what you're saying is true. Like you can't bet on Con Knipple to keep on missing shots in these big games, right? Like he's going to hit them at some point. This is a home game. Maybe this is the game he gets under wraps, as he struggled in some of these big games on neutral sites. This is maybe he gets it going, but this is a game I'm picking because Auburn has looked very good. Duke has struggled in these close games. I think Auburn's players maybe get in the heads of some of the freshmen. They have some aggravators on this team, Greg, that I think Bruce Pearl likes to have, so that could play a factor. And I also think maybe they picked up some scouting from the Kentucky game. They had Andrew Carr kind of go against the Duke Fives and maybe dribble to the basket. Maybe they do that with Janai Broom a little bit, and I think that's a mismatch they can exploit with his experience too. So I'm going to go Auburn based on what we've seen, but again, you're right. Usually home teams win in these type of games. All right, next one up, we have Alabama and North Carolina, two teams that maybe we thought more highly of before last week, and now maybe not as highly thought of, but another interesting matchup nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel like every one of these games that we bring up going to be like, man, I'm excited for. Like, I can't say it about every single one of these games because a lot of them are going on at the same time, but man, am I really excited about this game. This will be the first away team that I take so far. I'll take Bama. I think the line between these teams is very close, but I'm feeling. Obviously, Bama and Carolina have been wavering. Carolina did have, which we didn't. The one thing we didn't bring up about Maui was several huge, 15+ point comebacks. So RJ Davis just, and company, they have that ability to go on these big long runs. But I'm just getting a feeling for Mark Sears. Mark Sears hasn't popped in a game this year yet, and I'll put my stock on that.
Yeah, I think North Carolina has more developing to do as a team this season than a lot of people think, and I guess maybe that was proven in over Feast Week. And I don't know. I think Alabama has a roster ready to win now more than North Carolina, so I'm going to take the road team again in this one too. I think Mark Sears can step up. I think Grant Nelson provides some mismatch issues for defenses, and I don't know that much. I should say I don't know how much RJ Davis's supporting cast is really going to help him in this game specifically. So I'll go Alabama on the road as well. All right, next one up, we have Marquette and Iowa State. Greg, another good one here. Another one I'm sure you're excited to watch at Iowa State for this one. What do you think?
Excited to watch, not excited to pick because I'm just looking at two of these teams that play very good defense, and I just feel like Iowa State might have a smidge of an edge on offense just with some of the options that they have between Keyshawn Gilbert and Momcilovic. I'll take I feel like I'm doing the thing where I take all the home teams, but I just think Iowa State has a slight edge. I'd rather not pick this game, but you're going to make me, so I'll take Iowa State.
I can definitely understand that. If this is a neutral court, I'm taking Marquette all the way. Really like Cam Jones, but this is last year I doubted Hilton Magic, and it came back to bite me in the butt. So I'm going to go Iowa State, and I do think what you're saying is true about more options. If Iowa State's able to shut down Cam Jones, I don't know where Marquette goes next. Whereas if someone from Iowa State gets shut down, they have multiple options. So with that and Hilton Magic, I will go Iowa State.
If Marquette or if Iowa State shuts down Cam Jones, it's going to be defense to off. That's the only way Marquette is going to be. Like, they'll have to score in transition. They'll have to turn turnovers into points. Like that. That'll be their only hope.
Yeah, definitely. Greg, a game I'm not excited about, but we're going to have to pick here because it is a ranked matchup. We have Kansas and Creighton. This is at Creighton. Don't really know the status of Kalkbrenner. I assume Stephen Ashworth, since he played the last 2 games of the Players Era Festival, is going to be ready to go for this one. But I'll go really quickly, Greg. I'm taking Kansas. The way Creighton's playing, it's going to take a Herculean effort from these guys to put things together so quickly before this game.
Taking Kansas, but it is at home. We could be talking next Sunday or Monday night and be like, man, here's how Creighton won. But on paper, there's nothing that makes me want to, even at home, there's nothing that makes me want to pick Creighton right now.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. Well, I do like the team overall and the talent they have, and I think it takes some time to get ironed out. So we'll see. Maybe not like them in this game, but maybe like them long term too. Next one up, Greg, we have Pittsburgh and Mississippi State. This is the last game we're going to talk about on Wednesday. Now, Pittsburgh has 1 loss. Mississippi State has 1 loss. A lot of people were hyping up Mississippi State and how good Josh Hubbard had been playing, and then they lost to Butler, which is not the greatest loss. I mean, especially with Butler having some early struggles. So, kind of opens the door here for maybe a 50-50 pick here. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I just picked this game. It just looks like another fun. There are about 6 more, like you said, that I could have put on here. But these teams are both, playing pretty good ball. The ACC probably needs this win, but I don't think they get it. Josh Hubbard, just fun little guy to watch, and I'm not saying that diminutively. He's small, but he doesn't play like it. I swear, sometimes when he jumps, it looks like he gets 6 feet off the ground. But I'll take Chris Jans and company to win this game at home.
I'm going with him as well. Love Josh Hubbard, the way he plays. Obviously, had a great game against Kentucky last year, but it was really good throughout the SEC schedule last year. Listed at 5'11", we know that probably means he's 5'9", maybe. And he's shooting.
If he's 5'11", I'm 6'2".
Okay, there you go. Heard it here first. He is shooting 47% from the field, 47.4% from the field. People always try to judge field goal percentage, right? And hey, if you shoot under 50%, it's bad. If you are that short and you are shooting that well from the field, sign me up. Allen Iverson shot worse from that in his NBA career, I'm pretty sure. So that is just incredible that he's able to do that. So I'm happy to watch him play. He's one of the most exciting players. And Pitt is still a team I think we need to find out more about. They have a lot of new contributors, so excited to watch this game just to learn more. With other games, I'm kind of excited to watch some good teams play. This one, I think it's going to tell a lot about these 2 teams. All right, we'll move it over to Saturday as we kind of move past these events to get to some games that are of note. We have Wisconsin and Marquette, a rivalry game here. Greg, this one's at Marquette. A good rivalry the last couple of years. They haven't always played this game, but they have started back up.
Thank goodness I have what I feel like is an easy pick. I get to pick Marquette. They're playing at home. Wisconsin, obviously, hot start to the year, but since then. And if you really think about it, wasn't the big win Arizona? Didn't they put up over 100 on Arizona? So when you start putting that in context, it's Tonje's had a good year. Looks like he's their wing that they transfer in, and he just goes off. But I'm not going to pick Marquette to lose twice in the same week. As good as they're playing, I like them to shut down Wisconsin's offense, and I like them to Cam Jones to have a good game, even if he doesn't have a good game against Iowa State. So I'll take Marquette.
Yeah, Wisconsin's doing a good job of getting to the free throw line in these games. That is good. John Tonji's having a great season, and I think him and Stephen Crow working together is going to be good for this Wisconsin team. Maybe have them finish better than expected. I'm going Marquette at home. My love affair with Cam Jones. I think he's the player of the year so far. So I'm going to go with him at home, even though I think Wisconsin could maybe make it tougher than people expect. We'll see what the spread comes out in this game when we get later in the week. Next one up, Greg, we have Gonzaga and Kentucky. This is one that was kind of maybe born under the Calipari era, where him doing business with his friend Mark Few getting this job done. This one is in Seattle. There's a lot of controversy about how Kentucky won't play at the Kennel, won't play Gonzaga at their home stadium. A lot of teams do this. Some teams go to the Kennel. A lot of teams do play off campus. Obviously, this was a former regime scheduling this, so that kind of takes a little bit of the Kentucky won't come to play us at our place out of it. But an interesting game because of Gonzaga's loss last week to West Virginia, because Kentucky has played well and above any expectation. This should be a fast-paced game with a lot of offense, which probably means, since we're excited to watch that, it'll end up being 65-60 game.
Pass.
Okay.
There's a lot of games. That's like a lot of games this week. I'm looking at, and I'm like, man, like I just don't know who to pick. It's not a home game, but I'll take Gonzaga. Just on that, these teams are constructed similarly with a lot of older, experienced players. Not what we're used to seeing with Kentucky, obviously, but Mark Pope basically had to do that this offseason. Gonzaga's got Ryan Nembhard at the helm. Really takes care of the ball, distributes it well. Nolan Hickman's having a good year. Graham Ike, really good presence inside. I do wonder what it's going to look like. I wonder if Andrew Carr is going to put Graham Ike in some positions where, with him taking those outside shots. And it makes me wonder if, Gonzaga might do something a little bit different on defense. Maybe they'll switch all five instead. I don't know. We'll just have to see about that. But will take Gonzaga.
Yeah, I'm going to go Gonzaga as well. Virtual home game, as you mentioned, at least a lot closer to them. Have to take into account Kentucky's travel this week. They're going to Clemson earlier in the week, I think, to win that game. And then they go play a very good Gonzaga team, basically on the road. This doesn't set up well. Again, I'm more impressed than I thought I would be with Kentucky at this point. If you're just looking from an objective standpoint, you're going to have to pick them to lose at some point, right? They're not going to go undefeated. That's just not realistic. The next time I'd pick them to lose might be January at Mississippi State, which is the way the schedule looks out. They have Ohio State. Ohio State has some issues going on. Aaron Bradshaw, FBI investigation, some other stuff going on. That's a neutral site event. It is at Madison Square Garden in New York. They have Florida at home. They could lose that one. But I think the one I'm circling is at Mississippi State, and then home against Alabama is like the next ones they could lose, maybe at Tennessee. Those games are in January. I think they do maybe trip up once before that. This is the game I'll pick. Very impressed with how they're playing. They are first in points per game in the country, 96.7. Second in the country in assists per game, 21.1. And they're allowing just 68.1 points per game. Now, a lot of that's kind of stat padded against competition that maybe isn't the best, but they did play Duke, so we have a little bit of sample size there. So Gonzaga is going to win this game. I did like them as a top 5 team before the season. Mentioned that they could win the title. Kentucky, prove it to me again. I guess I'll say it that way. So I'm going to go Gonzaga to win this one at home. Greg, any final thoughts for the week? A lot of big matchups here.
Yeah. My only thought is that you mentioned the team that has the coach, he who must not be named. We've gone how many podcasts without mentioning that Orange team's coach? I don't want to talk about him yet.
Okay.
But now that you said Kentucky wins at Clemson, they are guaranteed to lose. So everybody go put your house, your savings, your whatever on Clemson. The whatever the money line is, they will not be favored in that game. So just go ahead and put money on Clemson. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, if you want to have that jinx. For reference, Clemson did lose to my Boise boys, but they do have some talent on the roster. I mean, we're not picking that game or whatever, but they beat San Francisco, who I mentioned earlier in the season, as a team that could make the tournament, and they're kind of getting like Jaden Zachary in the mix too. So it is they'll have to figure it out. But you're right, that is maybe me jinxing it, picking a game that's not even picked, and with all of our love of Brad Brunell last year, that is definitely up for par. All right, so it's my turn to remind everyone to like and subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening on podcast form, make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, on the Game House YouTube channel. Every subscription helps us out, and make sure to leave a comment as well. We'll take that into account as we do these shows and moving forward. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.